it's Lotus here. A few months ago, you may have noticed videos popping up in your recommended feed whose topic focuses on a creator by the name of Creepshow Art. If you're already aware of this situation, you may want to skip my little recap here. I know this was months ago, but I really didn't cover it at the time, and I honestly wanted to. I had a lot of thoughts. I still have a lot of thoughts about the situation. So there are actually a lot of layers to the story. Creepshow Art, also known by her real name, Shannon, was exposed by admins on an anonymous site, lolcow, for doxing her own sibling, as well as repeatedly breaking a number of other site rules. The site was built on the idea that public figures are ripe for comedy. A lolcow is in reference to a person who produces comedic material like a cow produces milk. This, of course, means that said public figures are not permitted to post about themselves anonymously, to stir up conversation, or to defend themselves, a rule which Shannon repeatedly broke, referring to herself both positively and negatively to generate attention. Once her anonymity was revoked by admins, a punishment reserved for only their most stubborn repeat offenders, her posts made the rounds across social media. It turns out that in addition to criticizing and praising her own channel, she would disparage and even slander a number of prominent YouTubers with whom she had made friendships. In addition, she also made several homophobic, transphobic, and ableist statements. She openly questioned another creator's sexuality, who was also supposed to be a friend of hers. So I know what you may be thinking. Lotus, you're saying that a bunch of admins from a vicious gossip site are making this claim that all of these awful posts are from Creepshow Art? How do we know for sure that Shannon was behind all of these? Well, many site admins have ways of tracking their users, including but not limited to site cookies, which record your browsing patterns, IP addresses across devices and locations, and written speech patterns on their own site. These admins allegedly used all of these tools to confirm Shannon's rule breaking and subsequently shared all of her post history, dating back several years. The evidence is pretty overwhelming that it was indeed her who posted disparagingly about her fellow creators, many of whom even considered her a best friend. And while this betrayal was understandably hurtful to the creators who thought they shared a close friendship with Shannon, the reason that this caused such an uproar was not only because her audience likely shared an affinity for many of these other prominent creators, but because her posts directly contradicted the person that she portrayed herself to be in her videos. She was extremely left-leaning, very socially conscious, and called out many other individuals for the exact behavior that she was engaging in behind a shroud of anonymity. If there's one thing that can turn an offense into a controversy, it's hypocrisy. But what about the title of this video? What do offensive posts on lolcow have to do with serious allegations of stalking? Well, once Shannon's two-facedness was exposed and her reputation had been thoroughly tarnished, Emily Artful, already wise to Shannon's duplicitousness, felt she needed to shed light on her own long sordid history with the creator before Shannon could find a way to pin her own crimes on Emily. As it turns out, Shannon is married to Emily's ex-boyfriend, and the two had been cyberstalking Emily for what has been revealed to be at least a decade. Emily actually came out with an entire video exposing the suspicious messages, threats, and how they even got her fired from her job at a time when she was trying to get her life back together after battling addiction. It is important to note, as Emily does herself multiple times, that these are allegations and cannot be definitively proven, but timelines, speech patterns, usernames, and more line up all too well for these allegations to be dismissed. Creepshow Art left the internet for 6 months after Emily dropped that video, only to return on December 31st, 2021 with a response to these allegations. Unfortunately, her defense against this accusation of more than a decade of serial online stalking was a flimsy attempt at a character assassination aimed at Emily. Even more unfortunately for Shannon, she actually peppered her own video with yet more evidence that she had in fact been stalking Emily all this time. Essentially, she told on herself.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Much of the evidence that she shared to paint Emily as a villain was information information that no one other than Emily herself and perhaps close family had access to. If you'd like to see for yourself, there are plenty of other videos on the topic. I'm not personally interested in dissecting every disturbing intricacy of these allegations. That's not really the point of this video, though we will delve further into this case in a bit. For now, I'm going to highlight another case of serial online stalking and harassment. In this case, the target was a creator by the name of Nalipls. Nalipls is a Twitch streamer who has made her living playing games and engaging with her audience in real time. A few months ago, Nali came forward with news that she had been stalked for the past 2 years by one of her chat moderators who originally went by the tag Propain. And may I just say, wow, what an edgelord. Nali's experiences may not have lasted for a decade, but they have been extremely harmful to her mental and even physical health. Where Shannon's obsession with Emily seems to have remained fairly consistent throughout the years and primarily consists of vague, cryptic messages of harassment and intimidation, even threats on occasion, inflicted periodically over the course of many years, Nali's stalker appears to have been far more overt in his tactics, and both have been relentless, to say the least. A little disclaimer before we continue. The point of this video isn't to compare pain or trauma of these victims, nor is it to pit either case against one another as though this is some kind of twisted competition for who deserves more of our attention or sympathy. Not even a little bit. What both of these women have suffered is unconscionable, and both have been severely and thoroughly wronged in ways that can and have caused lasting psychological and physical damage. They both deserve our empathy and respect, and they both deserve justice. Alright, now that I've said my piece on that, let's get back to Nali's story. Like Emily, Nali suffered in silence for the duration of what she endured. I mean, whenever people come out about these things, a lot of times the advice to them is don't feed the trolls. So, of course, they tried not to bring attention to it. And as Nali does not have a YouTube presence to my knowledge, her experience has not been nearly as well documented on this site in particular. Therefore, I will provide some extra context for her story. I'm also linking her twitlonger down below. According to Nali, she first met her stalker online where he became a moderator for her stream. His behavior did not seem to garner any concern from her for a while until after she met him in person at a signing during a convention back in 2019. It was then that his personality seemed to undergo a shift. She claims that from that point on, his need for her attention increased, as well as requests to speak privately on their Discord. Nali made it clear to him that she's in a relationship. After this, Propain expressed to one of Nali's friends that he was hoping to visit Nali in her home country of Canada, as he himself lives in the United States. Nali emphasizes that she has never expressed an interest in having him visit her, and this was the beginning of a concerning pattern. He made an alt account unbeknownst to Nali in order to leave inappropriate comments on her photos. Obviously, once she realized who was behind this fake account, she confronted him about this. He admitted to making the account and then threatened to take his own life. She called the police in his area to report this, and once she was certain that he was still alive a day later, she revoked his privileges as a moderator and cut contact. His pattern of behavior escalated instantly, and he created countless more accounts in order to harass Nali, her partner, the other moderators, and even her fans. Multiple people have corroborated her story, confirming that he sent them private messages which included photoshopped pictures of Nali's face on some unknown women's bodies, with the claim that these were Nali's intimate photos. According to Nali, he's also been paying people to create more of these photos. The harassment included threats, of course, and after months of constant daily torment, Nali was put in the emergency room for heart-related issues caused by the stress and fear inflicted upon her by her stalker. She was forced to quit streaming, which was her primary source of income. Nali shares that she actually pursued litigation, but ultimately that only resulted in more stress, financial loss, and her stalker receiving her address due to her agreeing to a settlement deal, revoking the restraining order that she had filed against him. She did this to recover some of the losses that she had endured financially due to his lawyer pushing court dates into oblivion to drain her of her savings. Propain, of course, doxed her repeatedly upon receipt of that information, and he also attempted to her. Due to differences in Canada's and the United States legal processes, Propain has been charged in Canada, but according to Nali, he has yet to be charged here in the US. There does not appear to be much more that she can do legally about this individual who is actively threatening her physical and mental well-being. She closes her statement with the very kind sentiment that she has chosen to protect his identity, despite some of her fans having unmasked him themselves. Now that we have context on these two cases of internet stalking, what do they have in common, and why would an individual go to such lengths just to terrorize one person? And how do both Nolly and Emily still have it within them to remain so empathetic towards these monsters? I wanted to dissect these cases to better understand what makes stalkers do what they do, in the hopes that the knowledge can maybe help someone else in a similar situation. I am also going to add another disclaimer that I am only a psychology student. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor or psychologist of any kind as of right now. I'm hoping that these discussions can maybe even lead to some sort of solution for victims or potential victims who may endure this in the future. While despite Nolly's stalker having been much more active, there's a lot more useful information to glean psychologically from Emily's case. Due to Shannon's prominent online presence and the amount of coverage on this story, we actually can get a clearer view and speculate as to what may have driven Shannon to do what she did to Emily. Obviously, this woman is unhinged. I'm not trying to justify her behaviors at all. I would never do that. What she did was reprehensible. I want to simply see if there is a way that we can uncover the patterns behind this stalking behavior. As mentioned previously, Shannon's husband is actually Emily's ex-boyfriend, Anthony. Emily and Anthony dated briefly, but as we can gather from Emily's own extensive record of her stalker's behavior and speech patterns, it appears that the harassment began with Anthony himself. With that in mind, it would appear that Shannon's obsession stemmed from Anthony's. While Shannon may not be the most reliable narrator, as we have come to understand based on years worth of her saying one thing to the public and another behind closed doors, she has always seemed fairly consistently brutal of herself to the public. I would argue that both her praise of herself and her criticism are her actual opinions of herself. That said, if her self-worth and self-interest are that low and high, respectively, at the same time, she would both feel the need to latch onto a partner who shows interest in her and put up with years of in comparisons while simultaneously understanding that she deserves better. I can't say for certain, but my theory is that Anthony chose Shannon to coax into that hashtag van life, leaving their worldly possessions behind, isolating her from her friends and family, and regularly talks about Emily to her. It's more than likely that these discussions are purely negative, as Anthony seems to be fairly skilled at keeping up the appearance of an upstanding citizen, again based on Emily's record of their interactions. However, even negative discussions surrounding another woman are still indicative of Anthony's attention and focus surrounding Emily rather than his wife. And Anthony knows that. He knows that every time he brings up Emily to Shannon, he's reminding her that he's thinking of her. And why is he still thinking about his ex-girlfriend when he's been with Shannon for years? That's a question Shannon has likely asked herself time and again. I'm not a therapist, again, yet, but it is my opinion that Anthony shows narcissistic behavioral patterns and enjoys the idea of forcing Emily to keep thinking about him as much as he thinks of her via this online harassment. He knows that she knows that it's him, and he loves that he holds this power over her to live rent-free in her head. Simultaneously, he loves that Shannon, in a bid to take her frustrations out on the woman who's occupying so much of her husband's attention and so many of his thoughts, is similarly always thinking about him and how to please him. There are unspoken cues that she's likely taken from him when he encouraged her to take up his mantle and begin cyberstalking and harassing Emily years ago. He was probably careful enough to never outright state, "You should do this," but he insinuated very clearly enough for her to get the memo. And because of her insecurities and resentment, she was all too willing to oblige. This is all entirely alleged and completely speculative, based solely on all of my research done on this particular case. It's entirely a fabricated theory and with little hard evidence to go on because I've never interviewed either of these people on a personal level. I've never spoken to Emily or Shannon. I don't know, and especially not Anthony. That man is so mysterious and enigmatic. I have no idea if anyone knows what he's really like behind closed doors. And let me just say, I did not give Shannon any direct views. I am a student of psychology, and so I do base all of my opinions on what I've gleaned over the years to determine the motivations of both Anthony and Shannon. However, without actually knowing anyone in this situation, it's all just a thought experiment at the very most. I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm sure by now you're wondering a few things, not the least of which being, how did these stalkers choose their victims so that I can avoid becoming a target? Well, it differs from each stalker, honestly. They all tend to have different motivators behind who they target. In Anthony's case, what both Emily and Shannon have in common, or at least had in common in the case of Emily, when she and Emily knew each other all of those years ago, is that paradoxical combination of low self-worth and overconfident presentation. According to Emily, she used to be just as bitter, vicious, and shallow as Shannon has proven herself to be. Emily has since grown as a person and has put in a lot of work to improve over the years through therapy. Shannon, on the other hand, does not appear to have put in the same amount of effort to grow. I actually believe that this is what Shannon now envies about Emily most of all. It's clear that Emily actually doesn't think about Anthony daily, nor does her life revolve around pleasing him and trying to keep him interested so that he isn't thinking of other women. In fact, Emily is happily married with children of her own and seems to be very self-confident without being egotistical. She has a healthy self-esteem now and has shown that she's capable of incredible growth as a human being. Shannon, unfortunately, does not appear to be capable of this as of right now, at least not on her own without therapy, and she doesn't appear to be willing to change. I would love to be proven wrong in this regard. I believe that everyone is capable of change, though it requires willingness, and not everyone is willing. In Shannon's case, for her to evolve as a person may require that she pry herself free of Anthony's grip and throw out all of the bad habits and coping mechanisms that she's developed over the years. She would likely flourish if she can admit to herself that she has potentially not only an addiction to stalking and harassing Emily to feel powerful, but that she may also be addicted to the internet and all of the attention that it's brought her. It is a very addictive place, especially if you already have a mental illness or a dopamine deficiency. I know I've painted Shannon as a bit of a victim in her own right, but let me be clear here, victims can also be aggressors, and that is how I see Shannon in this instance. She may never have been the picture of righteousness, as she's bragged about her ability to stalk people online before in one of her videos, and for years has used hateful language without hesitation. I believe that her toxicity was ripe for Anthony to pick, and he has since molded Shannon to his will. She's his resentful minion, trapped in a cycle of abuse and isolation and lashing out whenever possible while dodging accountability. Now, back to Nalipls' stalker, Propain. What could be his motivation for targeting Nully in this case? They were on good terms initially, and he had even met her in person without there being any overt red flags. Well, without any actual knowledge of who this person is, or really anything about him aside from his gender, country of origin, and interest in Nully, I can only theorize that Propain targeted Nully due to her influence. Stalking is an assertion of dominance over a person, and the more influential the target, the more powerful the stalker feels in affecting the target's quality of life. Of course, gender does factor in, according to scientific studies done on the subject. Most cases of stalking involve men stalking women, potentially due to society's expectation that men be more successful and more powerful than women. I will note that I'm not including trans men in this because I have not done studies on that. I don't believe that trans men have been studied in this regard, so I'm specifically referring to cis men in this case. Just wanted to make that clear. I don't want trans men to get any hate for this. As mentioned earlier, Propain was interested in getting closer to Nali, expressing interest in visiting her in Canada to meet with her personally. It seems to me from all that Nali has shared about his behavioral pattern towards her is that he was consumed by his obsession with her. He demanded her attention, likely feeling entitled to it, and when she finally laid down clear boundaries between them, he grew angry and desperate. How dare she take away what is rightfully mine, he might be thinking. We've seen this behavioral pattern before with incels, otherwise known as involuntary celibates. A lot of men have been taught by society that women's bodies and our attention are commodities to be obtained and possessed. At the very least, they can be earned in some way. Perhaps he felt that because he put time and effort into moderating her streams, she owed him her attention and time. Both Emily and Nali have several things in common, not least of which being that they are both women on the internet. And according to most studies and cases of cyberstalking, women are most likely to be targeted, especially if they're already in the public eye. So, unfortunately, there really is no safe way totally for women to just exist on the internet, especially if they have a larger following. So, how do we avoid becoming harassed and stalked? I don't think that we can completely avoid it. I know that might not be very comforting, but I think to suggest otherwise is to place blame on the victims of this horrible and thoroughly violating crime. We can absolutely take measures to protect ourselves, getting VPNs and safeguarding our private information as much as possible, but if the stalker is determined, that might not be enough. And although we do actually have laws protecting citizens from cyberstalking, there are many instances of law enforcement being either unable or unwilling to actively aid in preventing these types of threats from becoming reality. Thankfully, Nalipls and Emily Artful's stories have both ended extremely well. And in fact, while writing the script for this video, I actually found out that Nalipls' stalker was in fact arrested for his campaign against her. Thank God. And with Shannon's reputation so utterly demolished by her own unhinged behavior, I believe that thousands of people would easily and readily flock to Emily's aid were Shannon or Anthony to harass her any further. In the meantime, I do have some encouraging words for those who may be experiencing online harassment or stalking. You're not alone in this, and there are ways to get help. I'm going to link resources in the comments, but I'd like to share some here with you now from victimconnect.org. A lot of these are actually corroborated by many other sites that are resources for victims of cyberstalking and harassment. Number 1 is call 911 for immediate assistance. You know yourself and your situation better than anyone else. Trust your instincts and call for help if you feel that you are in danger. Number 2 is alert others. Tell trusted friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, and or your HR department to keep an eye out for suspicious activity, and so they don't mistakenly give out information to someone pretending to be a loved one. Number 3 is connect with an advocate. Advocates can often be found at local domestic violence and or agencies, police departments, and district attorneys' offices. Advocates can help explain local stalking laws, walk you through filing a protective order, connect you with local services, and help you to develop a safety plan. Document every incident. I think this one is extremely important, especially for cyberstalking incidents. Make a log of encounters with the stalker, hang-up calls, public sightings, anything of the like. Save all messages, emails, and your call history. Consider using this incident and behavior log form from the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center. This actually helped Emily the most, I would say, is the fact that she documented so many of these incidents over the years that it was extremely difficult for Shannon to try to cover her tracks and pretend that this wasn't her. Number 5 is end all contact. Sometimes this is easier said than done, but try not to answer calls or messages even if you are requesting that the stalker stop. Any contact may encourage the stalker to continue the stalking behavior. This did not work with Nalipls. There are some stalkers that are just only going to try harder because they just want the attention and believe that they deserved it. So all of this advice does not apply to every single case. Stalkers are different in their methods and behaviors, but this can be a really helpful resource. Take threats seriously. A direct threat against you is an obvious sign of danger. A stalker can also use threats of or harm to manipulate you into staying in contact or in a dangerous situation. Number 7 is create a safety plan. Develop a personalized plan to keep yourself safe. Find help doing this here. There is a link, and I will make sure that it is in the description as well, or connect with an advocate for assistance. And finally, prepare your children. Teach your children what to do if there is an emergency, like where to hide if there is danger in the house, or how to call the police or a trusted person for help. This is a really good piece of advice. However, it is my deepest hope that it never has to come to that. But I do understand the reality is that sometimes people with children are stalked and harassed, and unfortunately, this is very good advice, and I believe that that is actually really good to do with any domestic situation as well. Like I said, not all of these apply to every victim's case of cyberstalking and harassment, and it can be extremely difficult to get away once you're a target. However, there is hope. These people do not have as much power as they would like for you to believe, and you can break free of their grasp. That's it for today's video. I truly hope that you found it interesting and that maybe it's even somewhat helpful or encouraging. Please share the resources that I linked below with anyone who may need them, and stay safe out there.